those are the people I truly serve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking to the great Michael Rectenwald. We discuss the Great Reset and all things that are going on around us that can contribute to the Great Reset. And I think this would be a podcast that everybody would like, since Mr. Rectenwald had written a series on the Great Reset for Mises.org. If you want to get all the bonus content, including Year Zero ad-free, and I Done Told You, a new podcast with Beatrix and myself, where we get a little crazy and we talk a lot of shit, and we see where things go. Go to Substack or Patreon and subscribe for less than a cup of coffee a week. Less than a cup of coffee a week will get you I Done Told You, plus Year Zero ad-free, and a few other things. So, go to patreon.com/TD Salmons or TommySalmons.com to subscribe for a small fee and get all the extras. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Let's roll. So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you. Okay, I am here with Mr. Michael Rectenwald. How are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good. How about you, Tommy?
Always doing the best I can, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just life. You just got to keep trucking, you know.
Yes, sir.
All right, Boogie, you got to go lay down, buddy. Sorry, I have my dog in my truck with me, and as soon as I start talking, he thinks he's supposed to be getting all the attention. So, well, I asked you to come on because you had written a series of articles on the Great Reset, and you've obviously done a lot of research on that. And I've listened to a couple of the interviews you've done on the Great Reset as well. And it's something I've found myself interested in since last November. but not necessarily the Great Reset in title, but the entire project going back to shaping the future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab and all of
Right.
that. And I've been reading up on that and kind of studying more the ESG side of it. But for the audience members that aren't real familiar with it, can you give us a breakdown of what the Great Reset is from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean it's really a extensive PR campaign and propaganda campaign, and at the outset, and then it is an attempt to reset the economy and really the social order in general by virtue of changing consumption and production, and changing the investment structure of capitalism, and creating much closer coordination between states and corporate producers, and between states and each other, networking these states together, and in effect, it is a way of reducing consumption first and foremost for what we might call the first world, and in particular aimed at much reduced carbon emissions, carbon use, and it involves more or less directing. You mentioned ESG scores. It involves using these ESG scores, that's environmental, social, and governance scores. It involves directing investments toward these approved producers and distributors, corporations, vis-a-vis this ESG score, in order to create this kind of economy where these approved producers are getting all the investments and the funding, and it effectively staves off the production of other types of producers, and it leads, I think, to a kind of monopolization. It's a trend towards monopolization, and you end up with these approved corporate monopolistic producers, and a kind of evaporation of the middle class, as it were, that is independent, small business, and so forth. And as you see with COVID-19, The Great Reset, Klaus Schwab's book, the COVID crisis has been used to advance the Great Reset. And this happens through, the much decreased mobility and rights of the average citizen, and of course the elimination of many small businesses, and therefore a greater consolidation on top. It is involved with this idea of equity and fairness toward a greener future. So I think that and we saw this with Biden after he talked after the G7 summit. He spoke about this and how the G7 is trying to build back better, as he put it, with a fairer, more equitable economy, and to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative. But really, it's very similar to the Belt and Road in terms of how the relationship between capitalism and the state would be undertaken. And that is a much closer direction of capitalists or corporations by the state. And Schwab has said this repeatedly, that it's a big government all the way around. It's the much more intervention of the state in production and all that. He's playing with his toy over there.
Yes, he is. I got to throw it for him.
Okay. So, the way I see the outcome of it is it's sort of towards like a neo-feudalism, because they're trying to, equity means equal outcomes, of course. And so what they're trying to do is level things and reduce the income and the prospects, really, of the middle class, broadly speaking now, across the first world, and especially, and basically to bring it down to like third world levels in terms of consumption and so forth.
Right.
Because they believe, I think they say they believe, that this is necessary to avert climate catastrophe. That's what they say. I don't know whether they believe in it. It's hard to say what people actually believe.
Right.
But that's what they say. So I think it lends itself to a kind of neo-techno-feudalism with, like, what I say, with corporate oligarchs on top, with the states, and a kind of actually existing socialism on the ground.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that struck me when reading on all this stuff was it looks like a perfect evolution of the Dulles brothers, like, idea of defending corporatism around the world, and how they started intervening on behalf of corporations in order to prop up American businesses and just their friends, basically their friendly CEOs, you know, whether it was the British what was it called? BP was it was the Anglo-Persian, you know, oil company back in the day before it was British Petroleum. And
right.
So you have this kind of corporatism that was kind of baked in to American culture in the 1940s, and how it's evolved over time. If you read, you know, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, like the way he talks about operating in South America. So I'm kind of seeing this idea, and one of the things I've been kind of struggling with is, are the corporations pulling the strings here, or are the governments pulling the strings here, and the corporations are just links? It's kind of like one of those, you know, because I got into a conversation with Thad Russell the other day, and he's like, yeah, but corporations don't have nuclear submarines. And I'm like, yeah, but they can buy off the people that are controlling the nuclear submarines. And so it's kind of like this whole, like, conundrum, and it's really this kind of twisted kind of circle of things that you're trying to, you know, weigh in your mind and figure out how maneuver through it and figure out how it's all working.
Yeah, I think they're inextricably wed. I think that the agenda is actually being driven by NGOs and others, and they're inducing corporations and states to buy into this.
Right.
And some states, like in Africa, are saying we don't want this. So it isn't statist per se. I mean, these NGOs this is a very deceptive name, non-governmental organizations. They're very powerful. We're talking about all of the board members of these things are on the top, are top executives in major corporations. They are really powerful, and they are inducing states to buy in. And they're doing it using climate change as the main pretext, of course. And COVID is another pretext that they're using. It's an accelerant, if you will, COVID. So I can't say that it's strictly statist. And here's where I kind of differ with some libertarians. The state is whoever has the power to act as a state.
Right.
And that is very nebulous. And so I think that, yes, it's true that the states hold the nuclear weapons. They have the power to tax, and they have the power of violence exclusively. But as you said, when you have these corporations, these corporate heads that are so tied up in, that have so much money, that are able to pull strings and influence dramatically the way states act, then you have to extend the state out to include more than the government.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things I look at is when you look back, like I said, this has been drawing out since the 40s. And even prior to that, we had bankers like Rothschilds and them talking about, yes, I would like a world governance and yada yada yada.
Right.
The creation of the Federal Reserve was
Right.
definitely the first step in this whole project that became American empire. And when you read Zbigniew Brzezinski about the grand chessboard, when he's talking about how to create American hegemony throughout the system. And one of the things I really focused on was, my wife's from South Africa, so if you read the grand chessboard, he's focused a lot on oil and gas industry, right? But if you look at South Africa, supposedly there's this big rift between the United States and China when it comes to these corporate domineering structures and the competition around the world. But in South Africa, China does all the infrastructure. I mean, I had talked to my wife about possibly moving to South Africa before we decided she was going to move here. And we had talked about, me starting a construction company there. And she goes, it wouldn't work. China does like 90% of the infrastructure here. You wouldn't get any work. You wouldn't make any money. And I was like, well, that's crazy. And then her brother-in-law got a job with an oil company, and they sent him to a Western country, New Zealand, to work. His choices were Britain, New Zealand, or the US, and he chose to go to New Zealand. So it looks like there's some kind of cartelization and the separation of powers, in the African continent. You brought up Africa being resistant, a lot of places in Africa being resistant. In shaping the future of the fourth industrial revolution, they discuss these cultures that are resistant to modern technologies, and how they're basically described it as a type of neo-colonialism, how they're going to have to go in there and force these technologies upon these tribes, upon these cultures. And it's really interesting whenever you're looking at this and you're like, this is insane, especially when you look at, they wrote an article for WEF, I read a while back, where they were taking full credit for the lockdowns around the world and saying this was like countries implementing their policy to deal with COVID.
Exactly, it was.
And it does nothing but to further their agenda by, like you said, shutting down the mom and pops.
Yes, that was China's idea, the whole lockdown, and they propagated that across the West. And, we can only speculate as to why various governments, states, cities and so forth adopted these policies, but that's where they came from. And so the question of China is really a big one. The question is whether China is a partner in this, or are they a competing hegemon, as the G7 seems to suggest. I think there's more partnership than they admit, and I also think China is the model for this, at the very least. And that is state-directed capitalism. You have your favored corporations, and then you get, the rest are basically out. And the state determines who, but the state, is a very tricky entity that involves these cartels that are definitely powerful and inducing states to take up policies that favor them, and so forth. And one of the ways they're doing it is through the ESG score. Larry Fink sent, as you know, a letter to CEOs early in the year, and it basically was a warning. If you don't have, you don't meet the ESG index, you're going to be out. We're directing investments towards high ESG index producers.
Yeah, and the SEC created a task force to enforce the ESG scores. And the reason I focus so much on the ESG scores, because people think investors, and they're thinking these big investment firms, they're thinking billionaires and this, that, and the other. But my mind, first thing it went to is 401ks. And then I saw that Merrill Edge had implemented on their dashboard ESG scores for anybody who has a 401k with them. So this is going to affect everybody's banking, everybody's finances, everybody's economic future going forward. This isn't limited to big banks and big corporations.
No, not at all. In fact, the ESG score might be looked at as a kind of social credit score for corporations. it's in effect the same thing. And what figures into this is also wokeness,
Yeah.
and that is equity and all that. So they have to be appropriately woke, and that includes environmentalism, but it also includes like equity, fairness, and inclusion and all that,
Right.
which sound like, oh, that's, to the average ear, that sounds like good. Those are good things. But what it really means, equity is reduce. What it means is equity means equity on the bottom, of course. This is certainly nothing to do with these oligarchs. They don't care about equity.
Right.
I mean, equity amongst them. There's no equity between the top tier and the rest. That's for sure.
Right.
That's what the equity refers to is kind of leveling the population's outcomes.
Yeah, and that's across the world. I mean, they openly discuss this in Shaping the Future, where they're talking about uplifting, third world countries and lowering first world countries and kind of bringing everybody equal together. And another thing in the ESG score that I think people overlook, and all the libertarians got up in arms when they started talking about these vaccine passports. And I was like, well, that's part of this ESG. It was Morgan Stanley released like this graph, and it was a chart where they're showing under E you have these tiers, and these, and each of these tiers rains down, and then under S, social, you had health and safety. That was up under there. And I was like, how long is it going to be? I mean, we've been hearing for over a year that COVID-19 is basically racist, that it's attacking minority populations. So how long is it going to be that if you do not get the vaccine, you are racist?
You're a racist. No, that's a foregone conclusion. I mean, that's definitely where it goes.
Right.
If you don't get the vaccine, you're everything they've been spouting as despicable. This is why Biden keeps saying things like white supremacism is the worst problem that we have domestically in the United States, which nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, it's a complete insane statement. It has no basis whatsoever. I mean, there is no systemic white supremacism in the United States.
There will be.
I mean, yes, there will be.
Anytime the U.S. government declares war on something, you get more of it.
It rises.
Yeah.
And that's maybe part of the plan, is that they then will be able to isolate these people and then attack them, and put them in jail and things like that. I don't think a gulag of white supremacism is out of the question.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I made a joke yesterday on Twitter. I wish the U.S. government would declare war on my tomatoes.
And then they'll thrive.
Yeah. Then I'll have plenty of tomatoes.
As soon as they do that, you're right. Every war on this or that makes that industry or activity thrive, because that's really what's going on.
Right.
They're trying to make white supremacism real.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. They're trying to speak it into reality.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you, and that's what I've been watching for the last few years, is how they're trying to speak this into reality, and they try to turn everything into white supremacy, and then they try to change the definition, but that's another conversation altogether.
Yeah, that would be CRT and all that. Yeah,
but
which I think, I wrote it. One of my essays on the Great Reset was called "The Great Reset Woke Ideology," because I think that's the ideology that they're using to habituate people to this Great Reset.
Well, it's obvious. I mean, I think I heard it was Jeff Dice that said that the left is serious and the right isn't. He was just making a point that when the left says something, they're serious. And when the right says something, they're just paying lip service to it.
Yeah, they're
never going to do. And so I think these corporations have determined, and the U.S. government have determined, if you get the left on your side and you're able to move them and divide this country, the right's going to come along with them. And
they'll have to. If they don't, they'll isolate the resistors. And that was the whole that was one of the main functions of Trump. As I try to look in terms of what the function of something is. And Trump, one of the functions of Trump was to manage to get the so-called left on board with and in alliance with the political establishment, the corporatism on top, the military industrial complex, the intelligence agencies, and the neocons. That's who they're in bed with now.
Right. Yeah, it worked. And I've often questioned, was Trump a psyop? I've
I
often
wonder
asked
too.
that question
No, I
because
wonder too.
it's incredible. You couldn't have scripted it better.
Well, the way they used him was a masterstroke. Whether they scripted it in advance or not, they definitely took that character and they drove it to the conclusions they wanted, and it was a masterstroke, really.
Yeah, yeah, they definitely were able to manipulate him. If he wasn't installed intentionally for the purpose of what we see today, they definitely were able to manipulate him so
Right.
easily and so keenly. And a lot of it was because he was such what Bub? He had so much hubris, and
Yes, they
he
used his hubris against him, especially with this Operation Warp Speed.
right. Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
he wanted to be so, he wanted to be able to brag about bringing in the vaccine in 9 months. And now we have this experimental drug. And I wonder about the cognitive dissonance of some Trump true believers who are also vaccine skeptics, at least, because Trump is really instrumental in bringing Operation Warp Speed into play, obviously.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And he used the exact companies that are in bed with the WEF, like Pfizer and Moderna. They're all in bed together,
Right.
and you have to wonder, like, Moderna's never had an approved vaccine ever. So it's obvious the only reason
He wants in on the podcast.
he is just nonstop, man. It's obvious that the reason that they hey Bubba, you got to quit so I can focus. It's obvious that the reason that they were so determined to say that there was no treatment for COVID, whether ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, was so that they could get this emergency detail for
Right.
the Moderna vaccine, which, come to find out, is 50% owned by the NIH. So there's that.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, there's your state corporate collusion right there.
Right.
I mean, that's why I say, what is the state? I can't really say that it's limited to the government or governmental functionaries and governmental organs. It really goes past that.
Right.
And I think the sooner libertarians get this through their heads, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah, well, my buddy, I'm sure you've heard of him, Pete Quinones, he has this great saying that the libertarians would happily get on the boxcar if it was privately owned.
I've heard that one, yeah. Yeah.
So, but a big problem with the libertarians is they look at everything in just like history started yesterday almost, and they're not looking at the fact that, as we were pointing out with the CIA, this has been a slow-moving vessel for quite a long time, and the agenda has never really shifted. It's always been moving in the same direction. So it's really hard to believe that there's true administrative changes every 4 or 8 years whenever the vessel never changes direction.
Yeah,
and I think people overlook that so often.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really didn't change direction with Trump, frankly. In fact, they propelled some things forward that they couldn't have done otherwise. And one of the main ones is to get the so-called opposition, the left, on their side, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the war machine keeps turning, and now we have this like great corporatism, and we're staring down the possible collapse of the dollar. Supply chains broken, and people wonder, like, why are you so focused on growing your own vegetables? Why are you so focused on farming and this? And I'm like, because I'm looking around, and like, I can't trust anything that's happening.
I hope you have a spare room out there for me.
I got a couple. So.
I might need it. I'm living in the city in a real, like, a apartment complex, and I don't have any garden or anything. I sold my houses a little while ago, a good while ago, and just wanted to chill. I didn't want to deal with all that because I had a lot of maintenance. I had two or three buildings and so forth. I had an apartment building, and I just got tired of it. But now it looks like it's what you're doing, and I heard about that through your other podcasts. It's absolutely the smartest thing to do.
Yeah, I fled
Be
Houston.
independent as possible. Yeah.
I fled Houston 6 years ago. I was like, I just watching. I had lived in Houston area for 20 or 30 years, and just watching the way it grew, the way that people were not really interacting with each other as people. It was kind of like
Right.
just an object. That I was just like, I don't like this place. I can't do this anymore, and I got out. I was just like, I can't do this. So yeah, that was, and now I look at it and I'm like, well, that's the smartest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
I failed at a lot of things, and I failed at growing a lot of different vegetables, but damn it, I got out of that city.
Yeah, that's a good move. I don't know how bad that is. Pittsburgh, I'm in Pittsburgh, so it's not as bad as Houston, I don't think.
Yeah.
But it's still a city, and it's still got all the issues. We still have a state legislature or state governor that's a complete autocratic prick. So
Yeah. So, well, and another thing that we've seen develop over the last year with this unveiling of the Great Reset is you had Bill Gates buy up 242,000 acres of farmland. So now he's like the largest farm in America is owned by Bill Gates.
Yeah.
And then you have BlackRock taking all this Federal Reserve money that's getting shuffled down to them and buying up properties. So one of the things I've been weighing out is because I dabble in crypto. I don't know everything about it.
yeah,
So I dabble in crypto, and I do have 8 3/4 acres. So I got a little chunk of land that I'm living on. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, are these guys intentionally trying to get out of the inflationary market of the dollar and get into a non-inflationary asset such as land? But they don't trust crypto for the future. Do you think that's what's going on here?
and I think they don't trust crypto that much because it could be outlawed at some point. I mean, it could be crushed.
Yeah.
And I think that they know better than to put too much into crypto. I don't think you're going to see Bill Gates investing a whole lot into crypto. Elon Musk, yes, but not Gates. I think they know that it's inflated beyond belief, and also that it could fall as the lingua franca of the world. That's very possible.
Yeah.
So, and then there'll be an institution of the digital currency, and this is a centralized digital currency, not crypto.
Right. Right.
And that would be really totalitarian.
Yeah, I ran into a website called the Digital Dollar Project, where they're working on a federal crypto, and they're trying to develop that. And yeah, and you gotta kind of like ask yourself too, with all this talk of equity, when they do switch over from the dollar to this digital currency, are they going to determine like by race how much each
They
dollar
very
you're
well
trading?
might.
Like,
They very well might.
it makes you wonder like what exactly is happening here and how they're going to implement this. Are they going to take into consideration your personal ESG score based upon your investments, your purchases?
Yeah, the
that are
conversion.
being-
The conversion could have all kind of factors attached to it.
yeah.
It could have an ESG or a social credit score attached to it, and then times whatever times minus X, or if you have a low score, effectively it could reduce what they converted into digitally. This is very possible.
Yeah.
Plus,
Exactly.
there could be negative interest rates as well.
Yeah. 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 So if you don't spend your money, if you try to save your money, then your money's just valueless eventually.
They basically deduct out interest for trying to save instead of
Right.
actually giving you interest, which they're not giving any interest now really at all.
Yeah.
Very little interest. I mean, the interest rates are so ridiculous. You know, they definitely don't want saving. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just makes me wonder, like you know, because you saw, like, after January 6th, Bank of America was working with the FBI, and they were reporting any purchases that were made in Washington D.C. by their, you know, customers that didn't live in the area, which led to some people's arrest. And it's like, okay, so what other banking information are these big, you know, banks, you know, legacy banks handing over to the FBI, and how is this being utilized against us? And as soon as I found that, I had already been considering going with the local credit union by the house. But as soon as I saw that, I went and opened an account. I was like, that's it. I'm getting out.
Immediately, yeah.
Yeah.
Bank of America, yeah, they definitely complied, didn't they? I mean, we don't know what you know, this is why I say things like Facebook and Twitter and Google are not really strictly private industries as such. They're so compliant and so complicit with the intelligence community, it's ridiculous. In fact, as I've pointed out, Google's startup money came from In-Q-Tel, which was the CIA's special funding agency that they created. Facebook got it, you know, circuitously through the In-Q-Tel network. So I mean, and then they provide backdoor access to the NSA. I mean, all these records are scoured if they want. So they're really tight with the state. And of course, now with Biden appointing Mayorkas to oversee social media to make sure that disinformation is not circulating, this is, you know, this is these organizations. This is Facebook. This is absolute collusion. Now we're really talking about First Amendment for infringement.
Right. Well, and last year I ran across a study. It was like some investigative report where they were trying to figure out where the Pentagon's money was going and where the State Department was dumping money. And they discovered that between Microsoft and Google, the State Department had over 1,600 contracts with Microsoft and Google. You know, I mean, there's, as you said, there's nothing private about these corporations. And it makes, and see, my brain is, I'm trying to tie all this back, because I know that Google is an affiliate of the World Economic Forum, right? And so I'm like, so how does the State Department dollars getting dumped into Google contribute to the World Economic Forum? Like, how are they being utilized? And is the World Economic Forum just a conglomeration of all the intelligence agencies around the world that have come together under the auspice of CEOs that are actually trying to control not only the governments but the world population in order to create this hegemonic society?
Right. And, you know, with Operation Warp Speed, Google is involved in surveillance. I call it pharmacological vigilance, pharmacovigilance surveillance with the vaccines. Now, what this means, I don't know. It doesn't say. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of what pharmacovigilance is, pharmacovigilance surveillance. But they say that this is a massive database that they're amassing with the vaccine, and everybody that has the vaccine, they're getting data from them. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that the vaccine, something in the vaccine is transmitting this data,
right,
because that is not something I know. But I mean, Google doesn't deal in pen and paper, you know. So how are they getting this data? That's what I'd like to know. But they're definitely involved in Operation Warp Speed in this pharmacovigilance surveillance of the vaccinated. And that means the unvaccinated, of course, as well. So just how is this happening? Who knows?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not one of these people that think they put a chip in people and this chip is transmitting data to a database. But, you know, Google doesn't deal they deal in the digital. So what is that? What is happening with this pharmacovigilance surveillance? That's a
Well,
good.
yeah, that could be something as simple as when you show up to get a vaccine, and you get your little card, but I'm certain the doctors or whoever's administrating the vaccines are entering information into a database of
Oh,
some
that's for
sort.
sure.
So it's probably that database, I would assume, is linked to Google in some way, shape, or form. And this will probably be what creates the rollout of the app that they had talked about rolling out, or the
Yeah.
or whatever QR code or whatever they're going to roll out for people to download onto their phones.
Well, the vaccine passport. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
But they say they also
form.
monitor side effects. So I don't know what this means. They can monitor side effects, I guess, through people's voluntary submission of data. But I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if future iterations of the vaccine didn't contain some data transmission.
Yeah, that wouldn't shock me at all, especially like whenever like 60 Minutes just premieres out of nowhere that, the Pentagon has been injecting soldiers with a microchip, to measure their levels in during stressful situations so that they can administer whatever kind of therapy or vaccine they need to the soldiers to keep them on a level playing field, So
yes.
So I mean, it was kind of like one of those reports that just came out of nowhere, and people talked about it for a couple of days. But it's like something that stuck with me. It's like, why would they release this information unless it's something that we're going to need to know about in the future?
Right. It's slowly habituating people to this. I think this is how it works. And I don't know if you saw this video of this, I guess, a general who works in neuroscience. And he's talking about all the things that are already on the table, already operative. That includes all kinds of things like the ability to use nanobots to disrupt thoughts, to target people, and to change their thinking patterns, and to ascertain what their thinking patterns are. Things like that. Just this stuff is all operative, but they say it would be used on our quote unquote enemies. Well, who is our enemy if not the state?
Right. Well, white supremacists.
And, that's true.
And anti-government ideologicals, people like you and me,
Yeah. Matter of fact, libertarians were listed amongst the undesirables, the dissidents who are going to be a problem, and that will probably be grouped and camped with the white supremacists. In fact, that whole little squabble that's taken place in the Libertarian Party with the woke contingent coming down on Tom Woods, who knows who these people are? I mean, is this just a way to try to get libertarians dubbed as, white supremacists, and to try to, these meme bots that are running around saying these things? I really wonder what they're up to and who they are.
Yeah, you do have to wonder. And I know there was a tweet going around the other day where Nicholas Sarwar had mentioned his time working with the feds as a contractor, and people were like, oh, look, it's proven, and it's like, I don't know who this guy is,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know anything about the dude. So,
yeah.
But that's just because I try to stay out of that. I mean, I think he's a dope, and I don't have any respect for him, and that's about all I need to know about him.
Yeah, so. I don't care. Most of those people on the LP. I mean, I found a lot of these people, the woke libertarian, or the LOL libertarians, whatever they're calling them, is just
wokertarians or whatever.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, but my mind, I just keep tying all this stuff together, because you're talking about the nanoparticles, right? Well, I remember last year I ran into a story last year that they had discovered that there was a town in Florida their police department were scanning all their citizens' social media posts, and they were preemptively arresting their citizens on suspicion that they may commit a crime in the future, right? Well, they shut down that program, and then I just saw earlier this year the Texas Rangers just shut down a very similar program, and I'm like, what is going on? And so I'm looking at, and even in shaping the future of the fourth industrial revolution. Klaus Schwab writes about being
Predictive
able,
algorithms.
exactly, the predictive algorithms, whether you're going to be able to fly, whether you're going to be able to travel.
They'll be able to know your brain state with these and what you might do next with these predictive algorithms, and therefore preempt behavior. That's all a very big part of what they're talking about. And then, of course, they'll know whether you're a resistor at all. And he sort of frames it such that that resistors are losers. In fact, I think he uses that word. They're losers, because they won't subscribe to the fourth industrial revolution.
Right.
And they're always going to try to make you out to be a neo-Luddite as well. That's another way to, if you don't want to take on board this kind of technology, you're a neo-Luddite, and therefore, you're some sort of pathetic technophobic idiot. This is one of the ways. And of course, they're selling all these things as enhancements. That's kind of the theme of my book, Thought Criminal, which I'm not trying to sell it, but it's just so relevant here, is that there's a virus in the novel, but it's actually nanobots. And they attach to the neocortex, to the neurons, and they transmit data back and forth between this entity called collective mind. And they're able to preempt thought and supply thought, in fact, to the subjects. That's kind of the premise of that book.
Yeah, I started a short story that's similar to that, and I haven't read your book yet. It's one of the ones I do plan on getting when I'm not grounded anymore by my wife. Yeah, she won't allow me to buy any more books until I finish my office, and I got to finish outside before I get to work on my office. So luckily I have a few books I can read in the meantime, because libertarians always have more books than they've read. So
that's for sure.
so there's always that. But yeah, no, what I was going to name it In Time, just an in, kind of like iPod, like in apostrophe time.
Yeah.
And it follows this guy who went and got a nanobot injection up his nose and into his brain, and it allows him to feed directly to the internet. Like,
oh my God, that's the premise of my novel. Thought Criminal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so the whole idea is he's going to end up becoming an enemy of the state because the hackers are going to hack into his brain and insert all these ideas into his brain that are then being relayed across the internet. So
that's interesting. Yeah, in my novel, there's a drug that blocks the nanobots from transmitting. But so but this is just shows you that you can't get out of the matrix because you need this drug, which is addictive as well. So anyway,
it couldn't be something as simple as psilocybin. You had to make it addictive.
It wouldn't be interesting otherwise. It'd be too obviously anti big pharma. I wanted to make it complicated and paradoxical.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to have to get that book. That's going to be the list of the next books I get, because I remember you talking about it with Tom Woods.
Anthony Samaroff read it, and he had some good comments. He said it's great, but it's too linear, as he put it. There's a unilinear plot, and that's true, but it's a very good gripping plot.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have a lot of pieces of things coming in and all these splicing plot lines and all that, which seems to be the thing right now. It's just like, this is what's happening, and it's dramatic, but it's singular in its orientation.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. There have been plenty of books written in that style that have been very good, and it also gives you room to move if you want to create a series out of it.
That's right.
You can introduce other characters' storylines and then tie it all together in a final book. So,
have you ever read The Plague by Camus?
I haven't.
It's a very good book to read under our. Well, it was really good during the the real lockdown state that we were in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a good book, and it's very unilinear too. Everything is about this plague, and it's all going forward. And it's not released on the public accidentally, but it's still there.
Yeah. Okay, look, you're hung up in my cord. Sorry. So,
Okay.
he decided to pass out right next to me, so he's laying on my mic cord. So I'm like, I can't move here. Um, yeah, and so like, it's I don't feel like it's my imagination though. Like all the ties that I'm seeing between all
Yeah,
these
you
things.
just tie these things together. So am I. That's what I've been working on. I mean, they're not in your imagination. These things are all connected.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
yeah, it really feels that way. Especially when you, like you said, when you go through like the partners list of the
Yes,
WEF.
the partners list on the WEF. People think this is a mere conspiracy theory. Take a look at the partners, the corporate partners, and the governmental partners that are involved.
Oh well, and even like Yale and Harvard. I mean, it's
Yes,
just like you're like, wait a second, man. Like this is
exactly.
everywhere. This is a massive web of cartelization. You know
Mm-hmm.
that is just become the focal point. And what they've done. And it's I read this article. Have you ever heard of Parag Khanna?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's often contributor and speaker at the WEF. So
Oh, okay. Yeah.
obviously he's somebody because world leaders are listening to him.
Yeah,
And,
right.
and he wrote this article called um, called it was something about, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was how to take control through devolution, right? And so and oh, it was destroying empire through devolution. But what he's talking about is this project, this world project of where, like, if you have like a Brexit that passes or a Texit, and you have these decentralization movements, he's like, fine, let them have their decentralization. We'll let them have their culture. All we need to do is we need to get into the pockets of the politicians and the companies that are there locally, so we can control the local population by being involved with their local politic. So what we need to do is we need to keep an eye on these decentralized movements, but we shouldn't fight against them. And so whenever this whole like idea of Texit came up,
Yeah.
and I noticed that the federal government never reacted to it. Right
Yeah,
now,
that's
he got killed in committee, by the Texas state legislature. He got killed in committee, but it was a referendum to give the people of the citizens of Texas the opportunity to vote on whether Texas were to secede from the United States. The media never covered it. The Washington D.C. never mentioned it, never spoke about it. And there were polls, like in Corpus Christi, there was a poll: would you vote for secession of Texas? 60% of the people that like addressed that poll said yes, we would vote for secession. So it was actually like a fairly popular movement in Texas, and a popular idea in Texas. And still nobody, like whenever Rick Perry brought it up against the Obama administration back in like 2009, he had said something about it.
Yeah, they made a big deal
It was
out
a
of it.
huge deal. But suddenly the referendum is actually hitting the legislature. Nobody says a word. Nobody talks about it. And I'm like, oh, they already know, like, it doesn't matter. Do what you want to do. You can separate and create your own culture, because that doesn't matter to what our agenda is we need control of your economy. And we will backdoor you, and we will control your economy one way or the other.
Wow. So it's a simulated secession in effect.
Right.
It's not really substantial. It's actually a controlled secession,
Right.
if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
It'd be like controlled opposition in effect.
Absolutely. And so it would give any kind of decentralized movement, you have to watch for like, I'm all for the decentralization of powers, like that's,
Yeah, me too.
but you absolutely have to be aware that these people that have come up with these ideas have had plenty of time to sit around and think about any resistance that may come their way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about totalitarians. They don't let you out.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I've been trying to get across too. They're not going to let you out as such.
Right.
People say about secession, how about in the Soviet Union? Was anybody able to secede from that? Well, inside of the Soviet Union, you couldn't secede.
No.
You could go to the gulag, but you couldn't succeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
secede. Yeah.
No, you're right. You were waiting on the collapse of the monetary system, so that these countries could take back their sovereignty, and
Yeah.
I always envisioned that that's how America would eventually
Play out.
crumble, right?
Yeah.
But now that I'm looking at it, no, that's not what they're doing. They're deflating the American dollar in order to inflate this world power and redistribute wealth across the world in the way they see fit that plays to their, in part to their agenda. And so
equity on the ground, and this will please a lot of these people that have been calling for equality, economic equality, because they're going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're going to get it, but they're going to get it under this oligarchy.
Right.
Yeah. So there you go, socialists. Thanks a lot. That's what you've been actually working toward.
Well,
stupid, useful idiots.
Let's close on this point, because this is something I heard you talking to Tom Woods about a little bit. You came from the Marxist left, am I correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you had said, like, when y'all were talking about this subject, you had said if you were still a Marxist and on the left, that you would be on the side of the oligarchy in this situation.
Because you thought it was a temporary situation, and that the consolidation of capital that's underway will just make the revolution easier, because you'll have consolidated targets to overthrow. Consolidation and monopolization never bothers the left. In fact, Jacobin, the socialist, paper, they wrote an article about there's nothing great about small business. There's nothing great about, that they favor big business over small.
Right.
They favor monopoly over laissez-faire. And the socialists have always done that, and so do the elite. This is what people got to get through their heads. The elite favor monopoly. Mm-hmm. They don't want free markets. That's their definite enemy. That's the enemy of both socialists and oligarchs, and they're in bed together now, and they're working together at this time.
Right. And one of the things I said, because I've read a little bit of Marx, probably not near as much as you, but I've read just enough to kind of get the idea of what's going on. And one of the things that he makes perfectly clear is that the goal is always the revolution. And so it appeared to me like part of the strategy of the left by partnering with these big businesses was to have these lockdowns, have these, burn down these small businesses, radicalize the mom and pops, get them on your side to focus all their attention on the big businesses. Therefore, you have those hard targets right in front of you, and you have a broader population to fight the revolution.
Yeah, Marx always talked about the pauperization of the middle class and the petite bourgeoisie, and he talked about it descriptively, but also with a tendency towards prescribing it and actually seeing it as a good thing, because it would radicalize people and draw more people into the working class as such. And as such, then they could become revolutionary. So this is part of why these socialists are actually on board with all this. Little do they know they won't have any power to overthrow anything. Yeah. And so that's part and parcel of their whole agenda.
Yeah, one of the guys I follow on Twitter calls them Fortune 500 Marxists.
Yeah, and nobody can understand how it is that these corporations or these capitalists are so-called capitalists are actually socialists. All you have to do is you look at some history and read some Anthony C. Sutton, especially his book on the funding of the Bolshevik Revolution by these bankers. Mm-hmm. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is history.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the bankers, from what my understanding, they've been on both sides of almost every turmoil in history.
Right.
I mean,
they definitely favored. They've funded socialism in many cases. That same people funded FDR's projects as funded the Bolshevik Revolution.
If I'm not mistaken, they also funded Mao, right?
I'm not sure about that one. I'll have to look into that. They definitely funded Hitler.
Yeah, I knew about that. Yeah. Boy, that was a big job of the Dulles brothers was they were working with Cromwell and Sutton and over the law firm, and they were representing banks and big corporations in Nazi Germany, and they were funneling. So everybody said, well, the Ford Corporation funded the Nazis. Well, yes, but the way they did it was through.
Oh, they always do that.
Yeah,
there's always a level of obfuscation to keep it from being so obvious. Yeah. They were funding it through Cromwell and Sutton into Nazi Germany, and the Dulles brothers were the people that were in charge of handling those accounts and making the connections between the banks, the corporations, and the Nazis. And that didn't last forever. They did eventually back out of that, but they backed out of it. Yeah, that's right. They
were still smuggling Nazis up into Sweden and trying to help them escape through Operation Sunrise?
Into Argentina.
Yep. So, but all right, man. That's an hour, and I think we touched on a lot of good information.
Good.
You got some plugs? Like, what you got to plug?
Well, just go to my my website. Everything is there, michaelrectenwald.com, and all my books are linked there. You can buy them directly from me if you wish, or from Amazon. Take your pick. And all my essays are up there. All my interviews, those that are discoverable on the web, are up there, and all my media is up there, michaelrectenwald.com.
One of the things I'm working on is weaning myself off of Amazon.
Yeah.
Because Jeff Bezos is definitely a member of the WEF.
Yeah, so, that's why I say you can buy the books directly from me. You go to Apogee Books on my website. Yeah. It's one of the links,
Yeah, so definitely, if y'all want to buy the books, buy them directly from Michael. I really appreciate your time, man. I'm going to stop the recording right now.
Okay, Tommy, thank you.
Thank you.
Said you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Change the channel, it's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Cause this world needs a cleansing to burn away the shame and destroy all the rest. Robin Hood. Our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood. Thank you.